Welcome to episode number 52 of the Balancing Act podcast. I'm Andrew Tempe. Today we've got Mehul Patel joining us. Mehul has most recently served as the Chief Operating Officer of PharmaCann, one of the nation's largest cannabis companies, and prior to that he spent over 20 years in various leadership roles in the education industry. Mehul began his career at the Leo Burnett Company, where he led marketing and advertising initiatives for brands such as Kellogg's and Hallmark. Thank you so much for being here, Mehul.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So this is our last episode in our mini-series on organizational change and change management. Mehul is here to help us continue our exploration of change in the mergers and acquisitions space that we started with Andrea Manelli last week, and also to help us think through the change management process when somebody's changing careers or industries. But as we always do, before we get started, it would be great if you told our listeners more of your story.
Sure. Well, my story has a lot of twists and turns, and perhaps is one of the craziest and most diverse set of experiences, I think it's fair to say. So I began my career, as you mentioned, Andy, in marketing and advertising at one of the world's largest ad agencies, Leo Burnett, and had a phenomenal experience learning the ins and outs of marketing and working on some of the best brands out there. And the dot-com era rolled around, and I was tempted by the lure of joining an online startup, and it just happened to be in the education space. And I was helping them with their marketing efforts, and that's really where I kind of developed my love of the education business. Realized that this was so powerful, helping people achieve their full potential, and really changing their life trajectories through knowledge and enablement of experience. And so I spent the next 20 years in the education industry, and I covered the full spectrum from corporate learning to professional learning to test preparation to international and global education, higher education, number of things, and worked for some incredible companies, Thompson Learning, Kaplan, where you and I worked together, Andy, Apollo Education Group, and eventually Adtalem Global Education, which was another very large education company. And around that time, I hit the 20-year mark in my career in education, and I felt that I was maybe getting a little stale, and I needed to spread my wings and learn some new skills and perhaps try something new. And very serendipitously, an opportunity just came up that called on me to join the very fast-growing, no pun intended, cannabis industry. And it was something that I had no idea about and had never been in that kind of a business. But I said, why not? There'll be an opportunity to learn something new. And I joined PharmaCann a few years ago as its Chief Operating Officer. And PharmaCann is one of the country's largest cannabis companies. So that is that's been my story and my ride. It's like I said, a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah, it's quite the arc. And just right up front here, some listeners may wonder if there's an agenda that I have by inviting Mehul onto the show. First of all, Mehul is a great guy. Second of all, we've both been colleagues and competitors in the education space. And he works for a cannabis company. And that is before the show started, we talked about stigma and bringing down the stigma that just kind of hangs over the cannabis industry. And so if we help change just a couple of minds today, and bring down that aura of stigma here just a little bit, that would also be a goal. But if you had to pick one event in your life that was just a real accelerant to your career, what would it be?
I think, Andy, the time that we worked together at Kaplan was pretty transformational for me. And while that wasn't one event per se, it was one experience over several years. That was a time where I transitioned from being a functional leader, in my case, marketing leader, to more general management and operations and being an operator. And I had, the very good fortune of at the time, Jonathan Greer, who was the CEO, giving me the opportunity to run a couple of Kaplan's business units. And even what led up to that was pretty remarkable in that I had an opportunity to learn from some of the best operators out there. My predecessor, Roy Lipner, Andrea Manelli, who you've had on this show, I think, before, who ran the professional division, professional education division, Jonathan, who I mentioned, even my peers such as yourself and Josh Levinson and a couple of other people. I was surrounded by some really tried and true operators who really knew what they were doing. And I was a new operator. And so not only was I given an opportunity, but I was put in the perfect place to just learn from people. And during that time, I was a sponge. I soaked it all up. I grabbed all the knowledge and best practices that I could. And it was also an immense period of change in the world and in our industry, right? So we were accelerating into the digital era with online learning and ebooks, and then we were navigating ups and downs of macro issues such as the real estate market crash and the banking crisis. So what an unbelievable time to be learning and growing. It was like a real life business boot camp where challenges are being thrown at you, but you had a lot of people around you to mentor you and guide you. And that was pretty transformational for me.
Yeah. And I'll just echo that, nobody had the answers, in quotes. We were all working together. Some push and pull, some unconstructive, but mostly constructive push and pull, where we were striving to understand. We were seeking to understand and make the business a better place so that our customers could succeed in their career. So I 100% agree with you about that very exciting time in a company that neither of us work there anymore, but I certainly continue to support them. So let's dive into change and change management. Can you recall an example from your career when a major change event occurred and the potential impact of change on the humans involved really wasn't contemplated in advance? And the follow-on is, what were the ramifications?
Yeah. Well, look, the biggest change event that's probably happened in the last 50 plus years is what just happened from 2020 until now, right? Which is the COVID pandemic. And while it's sort of an easy example and maybe a cliche thing to point to, and maybe overused as an example, I think we want to talk about an impact that this has had on all elements of society. This is like nothing any of us have ever seen in our lifetimes, and nor did we predict that something like this was going to happen, right? So, everything from business and economic and health and well-being and social impacts. I mean, these have been massive impacts, and people have to learn to think, act, and behave, and do things differently. And there's a sort of a paradigm shift that happened over the last couple of years on a sort of seismic level, right? Like massive change in terms of just about every aspect of life. So I think, going back to your question about, from in the business setting, what were the impact or ramifications? Well, look, first, I think leaders have to find new ways of running their business. We had to adapt to a new normal almost overnight. This came without warning and it went fast, right? Yep. And so every aspect of the business model was challenged, every aspect of how you deliver value and service to your customers or how you managed employees. Many of those employees had to adapt to remote working. Many of them were balancing work and life while they had kids doing remote learning from home. Others who didn't have the ability to work remotely, like the healthcare profession or manufacturing or retail, had to brave the front lines and be concerned about safety and staying healthy. And through it all, I think, the lesson learned was that the companies that adapted quickly, embraced that change, and were agile enough to sort of dodge and weave through the countless rules and regs and changes and all this other stuff that happened, they endured. And they came out in the long run, strong. Those who didn't or couldn't really suffered, and in some cases just didn't make it, right? And I'm sure, time will tell, but history will present many, many case studies in business schools and so forth that'll be written about what happened. But, I think this was probably the most catastrophic or significant impact I could point to that really had a seismic shift in how we think, act, and behave in the business world.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. I've asked that question of a number of people, and they, the typical answer goes back to something that happened in a business setting. But I love how you put the pandemic just front and center, because the businesses that were agile were able to bob and weave, as you said, as new guidance came in, and had open minds, open ears, and were willing and able to change quickly. Really made the difference. Let's switch gears. Let's go back to last week, pick up on last week with mergers and acquisitions. During your career, you've driven a number of acquisitions. I've done the same. Without naming names, can you talk to us about the difference that managing for change can make on the success or failure of a transaction?
Sure. Well, first you have to realize, I think, that mergers and acquisitions are major change events, right? So these are not minor things that happen. So, merger acquisition in a non-business setting would be the equivalent of getting married, right? And unless you're just going to, on a whim, go and get married somewhere, there's a lot of planning that goes into that. There's a lot of life change that happens that comes with that, right? And most people are very deliberate about planning for that change. And I think companies have to also be very cognizant that this is a major, major change, and have to be, deliberate in planning for that. Most of that change tends to come after the transaction has happened, right? During an integration process and then some. So I think that anticipating what needs to happen during that integration process and getting ready and planning for that at a very early stage while the transaction is happening, not towards the end, is a best practice. In fact, I've always asked our teams to begin identifying integration milestones and activities during the due diligence phase, when we're learning about the company, because that's where you start forming some pretty significant opinions about how things are going to come together and things that are going to get impacted. And so, that starting that early helps, right? And you also have to recognize as a leader that not all of the change that comes with integration needs to happen all at once. It's probably one of the biggest learnings that I had as I, did more acquisitions, that, things need to be phased, right? And I always used a sort of an approach of 30, 60, 90, right? So the first 30 days in the integration plan were only those things that were non-negotiables and must-dos. These are things that have significant risk or could bring the business to its knees. Things like integrating HR and payroll and benefits, making sure your financial reporting is integrated so you can close your books, right? Legal or compliance or regulatory items that would cause a major risk to the business. These are things that were the first 30 days. And believe me, I had many people who tried to put other things in that 30 days that they deemed as a must do. An example would be, we got to integrate our email systems. Well, no, you don't, because we have email, they have email, and we can continue to use each other's email addresses. That's not a must do, right? That's just one more thing that's going to cause strain and pressure, right? So then you get to the 60 days, and that's where you start focusing on the short-term priorities that mitigate some of the smaller risks that you may have, or accomplishes the quick wins that you've identified as part of your diligence and your planning. And these tends to be things like those IT projects that I was talking about, or sales and marketing opportunities where you can go to market and capture some additional revenue or market share together. And then the 90 days is really where the magic starts to happen, because now things have sort of settled in, people have gotten to know each other, organizations have come together, and now it's about leveraging the full power of the transaction. This is where you really execute on your synergy opportunities and the longer term, less critical, but just as important and impactful things that create value per whatever was in your business case. And like I said, I think most companies make the mistake of trying to do everything too quickly, and all at once because they're desperate to deliver whatever was in this financial model that was presented for the acquisition. But if you have the foresight, you build that into your model, right? You build a phased approach into your model and a more balanced approach to change. The only other thing I would add is it also boils down to people and making sure you have the right teams on both sides of the businesses heading up the integration activities is critical. Give them the space, give them the time, dedicate most, if not all of their time during the first 90 days to ensuring that there's focus on integration and that they're not distracted with other things. In one of my experiences at Apollo Global, we did 9 acquisitions in 8 years. And I think one of the reasons why we were successful in integrations, we actually had a dedicated team that was just responsible purely full-time, there were full-time jobs on integration activities, right? And they made sure that those businesses got integrated well. And we had a great group of project managers, which is also a must, that kept the process moving. And the nice thing was that team went from acquisition to acquisition to acquisition, and they picked up a lot of knowledge every step of the way of things that you shouldn't do because they were mistakes or didn't work well, or things that worked really well and that they could leverage and put into the next acquisition and integration. So that was hugely helpful as well.
Yeah. So, I'm hearing, get started early on change, during the modeling process. That's one best practice that I heard. And, stage gate, make sure that you're able to spread out the change, and then the subtext to all of that I heard is be ready to be agile. I just love the old Mike Tyson quote. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Right.
Yeah. So that just always. And then the other best practice that I heard is, have a team. And it sounds like at Apollo Global, you guys, you had the right thing in place where you had a team of folks that were dedicated, because I think one of the worst things that you can do, and I've been guilty of this, is say, we're going to acquire company X and we're going to do business as usual at the same time. And so just adding more onto the pile instead of making the space and time for the transaction to happen. So all really, really great advice. Switching gears just a little bit, you and I have spent large portions of our careers in the education space. A few years ago, you made the leap as an operator into a completely different industry. We talked a little bit about it before the show, but can you tell us about that experience of moving from education to cannabis, and what was the best part and what was the hardest part of the process?
Sure. Well, first of all, it was an insane move for me, for sure, right? But incredible, and very thankful for having had the opportunity to be part of the cannabis industry. But I think that the hardest part about this initially was just making the leap, right? Leaving something that I'd been doing for 20 years that I loved doing and that I was very comfortable doing and could do, really, really well and knew the industry like the back of my hand, knew the business and what made it work, to jump into something completely unknown and something new and taking that kind of a risk. That's a scary leap to make. And it took me a while to really kind of get to that point and talk to a lot of mentors and advisors and so forth who encouraged me to take the leap and be part of, this incredible, category creation that was happening with cannabis. And remember, I was at the time looking to sort of refresh my skills and knowledge. So, and I needed a new challenge, and I definitely got it with cannabis, right? And so I jumped into the business, and then the hardest part was that it was all new to me. I had many skills that transferred over, whether it's like, acquisition, integration, leadership and building teams and putting into place business processes and all that. That's all fine. But I had to learn everything about this business from scratch, the company itself, the industry, the business model and how different factors affect that business model, compliance rules and regulations, and there are tons in the cannabis industry, right?
I bet.
How you manufacture products, how you operate retail stores. I've never done that before, right? Supply chain management, never had to deal with that before. So those are all new skills that I had to very quickly learn. And as there are, things that come with any new job, also learning new people and new workplace and new processes and tools for doing your job. Like these are all things that as the COO of the business, I needed to learn very, very quickly as I was inheriting a pretty large set of responsibilities. And then, cannabis is an industry that moves, at lightning speed. It's very, very fast paced. It's constantly changing with rules, regs, things like that. So not only are you trying to learn, but then you're also learning in a very fast paced changing industry. So that was for sure, I think, some of the challenges or some of the hard things that I encountered. And I would say also, like, perhaps the craziest part of all that was my first week on the job was when the COVID pandemic really kind of hit and that everybody got sent home for remote working. So, there I was, my first day with nobody in the office, right? That was a lot of fun too, but it's been a great ride and really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, we talked about this before the show, but I'd like to personally thank you for your time and energy that you've devoted to the cannabis industry. We talked about stigma and just bringing down the temperature of the conversations about cannabis in the United States is very important. Just to have rational, adult conversations about what this is, what it's not, and how to make the most of it. So, we talk on this podcast. We talk a lot about skills and reskilling. What are some of the top human skills that you'd encourage the leadership team of a company that's thinking about a major change event to proactively instill in their employees?
Yeah. So, the obvious one is going to be communication, Andy. I think that so much of change management boils down to, are you communicating? Are you communicating effectively in a timely basis, keeping all the key stakeholders connected and on the same page? I've seen so many integration efforts or change management efforts, fail because of a lack of good communication, right? And so I think that is paramount as a skill that we need to teach people, not just at a leadership level, but below. We've gotten too used to in business doing things over email and text messaging and instant messaging, and the art of dialogue has kind of disappeared. And
Right.
And again, change management is not just about sending an email about something, but it's about talking through and understanding. And I think that art of communication is really, really important. So I would reinforce those skills. Of course, I mentioned earlier basic project management principles. No, you don't have to have everybody go through PMI certification, but you certainly should help everybody understand the basics of, when there are major change events or initiatives, what are the interdependencies that your function has with another and so forth, right? And those are just basic project management concepts that I think people need to refresh on. Time management, we touched on earlier. Look, everybody has a full-time job and then we're asking them to do more. So unless you carve it out and say it's 100% of your time, people are going to have to juggle things and balance things. And perhaps I think the one thing that I see that is not necessarily about change management, but certainly a universal truth, I think, and something that impacts change management is the ability to deal with ambiguity. Answers are not always black and white, and everything's not always spelled out. If there was a playbook for exactly what you should do and follow, then that'd be great, but there never is. And so understanding how to make decisions with, maybe 80% of the information as opposed to 100%, or complete lack of information and being able to sort of get to an answer, or to be able to, be agile and change direction as needed is critical, I think, during change processes. And so I'd say those are some of the things that employers should definitely be looking at to brush up their employee skills on.
Yeah, thank you for starting with communication. It's completely unprompted. I did not prompt Mehul to do it. Our next mini series is all about communication, and we purposefully put that in there, timed it that way so that communication followed our conversations about change and change management. If a follow-on question here, we were talking about the skills to instill in the employees of the organization. What is special that leaders need to focus on before they really start to engage in big change events like merger or acquisition?
Yeah. Well, look. So again, we'll headline with communication, right? That it's not only helping employees understand how to communicate with each other better, but then leaders sending out the right messaging and the right communication along the way so that keeps the train moving down the tracks at the right speed and direction, I think is important. Resource planning and allocation, certainly, very, very important. Again, very few businesses have infinite, resources and human capital or, available to work on things. So making sure that, you understand where the gives and takes are as part of a major change management process. And then related to that, I think, talent management. So leaders need to understand, how to get the most out of the people that they have and putting the right players in the right positions as part of that change initiative. Not everybody's going to have a seat on the bus for that, right? And understanding who's going to get the best results in the period of time that you've outlined is really important. And then I'd say, a skill that I've certainly lived and breathed by, and I think you have too, Andy, knowing you very well and work with you, is servant leadership. I think leaders need to be prepared to get their hands dirty and do some of that work down in the trenches alongside the people who are going through this change process. Change is hard. And if people feel like they've just sort of been relegated and sort of abandoned and, you guys figure it out while I go off and do this, that's never a good thing. And I think leaders who are a part of that process and alongside their teams and helping to kind of move the organization along is, being involved at a deeper level, I've always seen works best.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. So as we move toward wrapping up this episode, if you had a new college graduate or an individual who's re-entering the workforce sitting right in front of you right now, what advice do you give them?
I'd say run, don't go into the business world. It's crazy. Go be a YouTube star or professional video game player or something. But just kidding. No, look, I think in all seriousness, I think that some of the hard skills that people need to learn as they go into the world of business are things like, digital savviness, right? We're in the digital era now. Technology is advancing rapidly and things are progressing fast. And so your ability to understand the digital world, the digital verse is hugely important. Data and data analysis, we're surrounded by, infinite amounts of data now, and it's understanding how to work through that and make informed decision and the predictive analytics skills that come with that. We talked about communication. So these are some of the hard skills I think people need to kind of, have. But I think in terms of behaviors, my advice would be, always be learning, be curious, right? It's one of the most admirable traits, I think, in a good business person is a sense of curiosity and really trying to learn new things and try new things. And in the process of doing so, a mentor once told me, you have 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. Use them in that proportion, right? So always be listening, always be looking and learning, and speak little because you don't know everything yet, but you have a lot to add as you sort of gain that knowledge and skills, right? Take accountability for your work and your results. Leaders love to see people who step up and say, "I got that. That's mine," and I'm responsible for this. And then, the topic of this episode, right? Be adaptable, be flexible, be willing to change. right now, if you're overwhelmed by the pace of change right now, just recognize that right now is the slowest amount of change that you will experience for the rest of your life, right? It's only going to get faster with technology and AI and other things. The speed of change will increase from this point forward. So get used to it and don't fight it. Be agile and accept whatever comes at you with ambition and enthusiasm and make the most of it.
Fighting change is the fast pass to becoming a member of the clay layer or organizational permafrost. And worst case is part of the actively disengaged in the workforce. So that's wonderful advice, Mehul. I want to thank you for imparting your wisdom to our audience. I want to thank our listeners for joining in. My name is Andrew Tempe. This is the Balancing Act podcast. You can find us on all the major podcasting services. Please like, subscribe, rate, all of that fun stuff, and we will see you next time.